Hello and welcome to the Hibs Observer Tactical Analysis Show with myself, Liam Bryce, joined by Craig Nisbet to look back at Sunday's defeat to Celtic at Easter Road in the Scottish Premiership. Hibs giving themselves a mountain to climb by going 2 goals down in the first half, responding via a Martin Boyle penalty. And despite a bit of a push towards the end of the game, they were unable to rescue a point. So a second defeat on the bounce for David Gray's side after that loss through at Motherwell last midweek. And then that tees up this weekend's game against Falkirk. A bit of pressure on Hibs to try and get themselves back on track heading into the notoriously busy festive period. So, Craig, as always, thanks for joining us. How are you getting on?
Yeah, I'm good. It's good to be back after a few games away. And I had a couple of obviously disappointing with the defeat, but a couple interesting wee tactical things to look at in the game. So yeah, good. Looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah, as always with this show, regardless of the result, there's always plenty to pick over from these games. So just before we get started, as always, folks, a wee word for our sponsor. The Hibs Observer is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV today. With thousands of jobs across Edinburgh and the surrounding area, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs. So start your search today. So let's get into it. We'll go straight into a wee look at our stats bomb content from the game. We'll first of all have a wee look at how Hibs shaped up on paper and then how that actually panned out throughout the game. So obviously there was an enforced change in the back three with Grant Hanley being suspended after his red card at Motherwell. Another change brought Miguel Chaiwa back into the starting 11. He'd been on the bench for the last he was on the bench at Motherwell, and prior to that, he had missed games after picking up an illness, we believe, when he was representing Zambia on international duty. So Chaiwa back in again. Well, to an extent that he was, like for like, if you to a certain extent with Barlaser in the Dan Barlaser, in the role. He was asked to play Warren O'Hora going to the right hand side of that back three, and then obviously another change with Jordan Obita coming on to the left hand side. So I mean, in terms of the team, Craig, what was your thoughts on how Hibs lined up and then how they tried to approach the game? Obviously, up top as well, I didn't touch on that. Martin Boyle and Kieran Bowie keeping their places up top. Thibaut Clichy missed the game through injury. It's hoped that he'll be back for the Falkirk game at the weekend, but he's had a bit of an issue that he's been nursing since the international break when Hibs had that bounce game against Dunfermline. You can read more about that on the hibsobserver.co.uk website if you're a subscriber. But Craig, back to my question there, but it only took me a couple of minutes to fly off on a silly tangent. We'll try and keep it as related to the football as this game as possible. What do you make of the Hibs lineup and how they approached the game in general?
Yeah, I think it, especially looking at the subs bench was fairly light, with a couple of injuries and suspensions. So yeah, and the changes, I think having Chaiwa in the middle with Mulligan, the idea would have been that they could press a bit more aggressively, a bit more legs in the middle. We know Dan Barlaser's, that's not the strong side of his game. So I think that change made a lot of sense. Allows McGrath maybe to push up as well and press with a bit more aggression. And then I think, with bringing Obita in, the idea would have been to try and allow Nicky Cadden to get as high up the pitch as possible, which we did up until he unfortunately got himself injured, which wasn't ideal. And I'm sure through a bit of those plans out the window, he did manage to get a decent early delivery in. So you could see the sort of game plan for Gray there. And then, of course, putting Rocky back central and O'Hora on the right-hand side is pretty straightforward and something that those guys are comfortable playing. So, yeah, before the game, I thought it was actually, with what we had, it was a good selection and it made a lot of sense in terms of what I think the game plan was.
Yeah, so again, the passing network here, folks, is just a look at kind of average positions where players were picking up possession. Obviously, the lines between players represent the number of connections in terms of passes. So you can see, the various kind of patterns of play. The sort of larger the circle around the player indicates more involvement, more touches on the ball. So you can see there who was perhaps less involved in the game, who was more so. The colours pertains to a stats bomb metric, as they call it, on ball value, and it's just basically looks to measure the sort of the value of a player's actions. How did what they did on the pitch contribute to Hibs scoring a goal or creating chances. You can see there that they did rate Obita and Nicky Cadden quite highly. Chris Cadden as well, actually, who had chances of his own. So yeah, that just gives you a sort of overview of how that panned out. You can see there Chaiwa and Mulligan. Probably you can tell maybe from Chaiwa's average position there, maybe being a wee bit more aggressive than you'd expect from Barlasser, who would tend to sit in front of that back four. But as you said there, with Chaiwa's running power, his athleticism does allow you to do that a wee bit more. So we just move it on, and this takes us to a sort of broader look at the game before we get into things in a wee bit more of a granular level. For those of you who've joined us before, you'll have seen this plenty of times. If you haven't, this is the expected goals race chart from the game, and it just sort of gives you an idea of the flow of the game in terms of chances created. You can see big spikes where goals were scored, others where chances were created, maybe not taken, and it makes for pretty frustrating reading, this one in particular for Hibs, because according to StatsBomb's assessment of the game, they had more expected goals than Celtic. Obviously, the penalty converted by Martin Boyle does contribute very significantly to that, but still, coming out of that game with more expected goals than the Premiership champions, who tend to dominate games, they will always tend to dominate possession. It will be a frustrating one for Hibs, and it will certainly, I think, contribute to that feeling that Hibs will certainly feel that they should have taken something from this game, Craig. And I think this chart here does lend a bit of weight to that point of view.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the opening up until Celtic's first goal, you can see they'd created pretty much no chances, really, and we had a couple with a couple of good deliveries in the box. Obviously, Boyle had a really big chance early on with Nicky Cadden's delivery, and when Sriracha comes in just at the last kind of minute and puts him off a little bit, but he should hit the target definitely from that position. And yeah, we were, and McGrath had a chance, who pulled back to him, and he hits it just over the bar. So you could see that we were, we had decent spells of possession. We were pressing fairly aggressively. Celtic were, before their goal, they were starting to get a wee foothold on the ball a little bit more, and they had maybe clocked on to what we were trying to do. But like losing 2 goals in quick succession like we did, it makes the job so much harder trying to get back into the game at that point. And obviously, the penalty came at a good time in the second half, and obviously brought us back into the game. But I just think then when you sort of turn to the bench and looking to change things up, we did what we could in terms of trying to create a more attacking side to try and push to get the equaliser. But I think at that point we were just a wee bit let down with what we had and what we could change. And we created that one big moment, I suppose, with Chris Cadden and his chance in the sort of latter part of the game. And he is on the stretch a little bit, and it's a good save from Kasper Schmeichel. But again, that there, you want him to slot that into the corner or go back across the goalkeeper in those moments. And it was just one of those things. And the 2 mistakes that we made, Celtic punished us, and the opportunities we had, we just weren't able to take them. And despite the fact that Celtic are a weaker team than they have been over the previous years, they still have enough experience to see games out like that. So that's where the frustration comes, I think, is that I think we were definitely worthy of a point, and I think on another day we probably could have won that game.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. But you just look at the 2 Celtic goals there, and it's, again, second game in a row where Hibs have conceded 2 goals in quick succession. It's not a habit you want to be getting into with any regularity. And as you said there, the expected goals chart and the flow of the game does back up that feeling that Hibs were on top early on, and then but then that just adds to the frustration. I think it was 2 goals in the space of 33 seconds of play. It's you just can't be doing that, really. I mean, not against any team, never mind, a team like Celtic, like as you say there, they've got the quality and the experience to, once they get into that kind of position, you're going to have a really hard time trying to pull that back, as Hibs found out to their cost. And you can even see up at the top there, based on the chances created, the way the game panned out, Stats perhaps gives Hibs a 43% chance of winning that game, compared to Celtic's 24, a draw 33%. So that is, that will make really frustrating reading. But in terms of the goals themselves conceded, the first one just comes from a Hibs mistake, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, Salinger's been outstanding for us, really, hasn't he? And really comfortable playing out from the back, and he's actually never struck me as someone as a big risk taker. He's always been quite comfortable going long if he feels he has to. And when you watch the goal back, it's the ball's coming down, and Celtic, you can see they are pressing fairly aggressively, and just that ball to Chaiwa, it's not really on. He's running in square, he's got a lot of pressure on him, and the way Salinger plays it as well, he's at quite a funny angle, and it just, you can see the ball just skidding away from Chaiwa, who slips. He actually slipped quite a lot in the game, so I don't know what, needs to get a good old pair of studs on, I think, there. But and obviously as soon as Hatate and Maeda get into those positions, Salinger actually got close to almost getting it just before it got squared to Maeda, but it was just such a blow to lose a goal like that, and it's just very uncharacteristic. Huge frustration. But I think for Gray, and even for the fans, not that you can accept a goal like that, but if you're trying to play out and you're trying to play that kind of way of football, which we've been doing, is that the goals might happen. But I think it's then losing the goal straight away after it that is probably harder to stomach.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably, from a coach's point of view, that's pretty, unforgivable to then give away another one in such quick succession. And then, that's, you're always up against it from that point. I mean, you can see even there how, Hibs created those early chances. You can see the expected goals going up. And then it pretty much flatlines until Boyle gets the penalty. And then they have a wee push towards the end. But just bringing it back to that second goal, it's just, you just can't do that, can you? You can't allow that to happen against anything.
No, it's we obviously have kick-off, and I think we go forward. I think Chris Cadden looks to play it down for Boyle. Celtic regain possession, and they go out down the right-hand side, and we'll probably discuss, like we were, obviously Nicky Cadden was playing in quite an advanced position. If anyone was at the game, you would have almost looked like we had a front three at times. And they do get a bit lucky, Celtic. I think Donovan hits it off Nicky Cadden, and it springs back to Trusty, but then he goes to Schmeichel, to Scales, and by the time it gets to Srirachi, they've got a bit of an overload on that side. It's a quick 1-2 Hatate, I think, and Srirachi's away, and as he drives forward, Engels is actually in the middle. Chai was kind of half and half. He's sort of covering Engels, but then going towards Srirachi, and as it goes out to Yang, Srirachi keeps his run, and Yang just gets, Chris Cadden gets out there. He's obviously fearful of Yang. I thought Yang actually had a really good game. He was pretty decent. He was a good threat for Celtic, but probably need to do more to stop the cross. And then obviously it's McGrath who's chasing back to get into the middle, and obviously he was about a leg's distance away from Engels, as Engels found out when he got a boot square in the face. But even then, Rocky's kind of pulled in by Maeda, and him and O'Hora are kind of almost in the same area. So I feel like even in that moment, maybe O'Hora could have picked up Maeda, left Rocky in the middle, and Rocky maybe would have got to that. But, it's a brave header from Engels, and if I was being really critical, not to sort of get down on Salinger, but I kind of felt like he should have saved it. It was right at him. He seemed to be sort of going, it actually reminded me a bit of some of the goals that Jordan Smith conceded, when he's sort of almost going down as the header comes in, and it's kind of right at him, and he gets a good palm to it and almost palms it into the roof of the net. So, not a good sort of 2 minutes for Salinger. Anyway.
Yeah, I did think that when I seen the goal back, and then I thought I might just been a wee bit harsh there. So either we're both correct, or both of us have been really harsh. But I'm going to give us the benefit of the doubt on that one.
I've watched it back a few times, and I still, it's always difficult. But even at the game, I thought, that looked right at him, and it didn't look like there was much pace on the cross and pace on the header. So I think he'll be disappointed with that. Obviously he's made some unbelievable saves in his time, but I think he's maybe rattled from the mistake he's just made, and just another attack and just not in the right position. And yeah,
I know it's that whole passage of the game is just the serious perils of being a goalie. I think. So I mean, why don't we? To sort of demonstrate this in a bit more practical terms, Craig, as always, brings the tactics board with him for these shows, and it just it gives you a better visual representation of the points we are discussing. And this week is no different, because here it is, the tactics board that is back. Craig, what do you want to take us through on this? What are we looking at today?
Well, I think it's just I'll maybe start off just what we were trying to do. So, like, in possession, we were still building as a back three, so there was no much change there, really. We still had Obita up until, obviously, he went into left wing back when Nicky Cadden went off, and we had Rocky and O'Hora, and we still kind of set up like that with both Caddens, and then, obviously, Obita being quite further up the pitch. So there was not much change, really, I would say, in possession, but out of possession, when Celtic had the ball, so if you take, like, that's Trusty on the ball in here, we've got Donovan. Nicky Cadden was playing really, really high up in this position here. You had Boyle and Bowie up in these areas here in front of the centre halves. McGrath was kind of tasked with man marking Callum McGregor. And then in these positions here, obviously you had Engels and Hatate, and we had Mulligan and Chaiwa. So then you bring up your back three into this area. Now that leaves Chris Cadden there. Now, what it looked like when you were at the game was it almost looked like we had a front three across those areas, and then we had a midfield three, and we had a back four. So we kind of looked like a 4-3-3, matching Celtic out. And it did sort of work for a couple of occasions where Nicky Cadden was able to get really close onto Donovan. We kept pressuring, kept going down that side. Like if for those who watched from the start, if you go back and have a look at the on-ball value, it was Obita and it was Nicky Cadden that had the highest on-ball value. So we were targeting down that left-hand side, and part of it is to try and keep Nicky Cadden really high, and we don't want him back defending as much. But what it did lead to, and it's exactly what happens in the build-up to Celtic's second goal, and then it happens throughout the rest of the game, was as the ball goes into this position here, and it's a very aggressive press, but obviously Celtic always have one spare at the back with Schmeichel. So when it goes into this position here, even if Bowie follows it in and Boyle goes into there, as soon as it gets into this position, if we're not making contact there, Sirachi's free. And what that means is as the ball goes into that area, Chris Cadden wasn't doing the same on the other side as Nicky Cadden. He was staying back. And I think that was to give us just that back four shape. But what it ended up doing was it then meant that Mulligan had to get out and get across, which then leaves Hatate free. Yang was high and wide, pinning Chris Cadden in this area like that. Maeda's running in between Rocky and O'Hora, and it just left a 2v1 there all the time. So then it can just be popped into Hatate round the corner, Sirachi's out, and then they're in behind us. And that's what happened for the goal. You can see how the goal would actually play out from there, with then Engels going forward and everybody running in those directions. But even into the second half, when Nicky Cadden went off, I thought we would abandon that because, we've not got his deliveries, but we actually kept playing it. And it just meant that every time we were looking to press, I'll not flip the board round, but like when Celtic were playing out, if you take on this side, and it's happened a lot when Kieran Tierney came on as well, was that Boyle would, so you'd have maybe Mulligan in this position here, Boyle would be sitting sort of half and half. Yang would be keeping Chris Cadden across here. Maeda would be in this position here. And you can see Boyle's in this position now where if he goes inside, we should be probably trying to show them into the middle, but we kept trying to show wide. And as the ball goes into that position here again, they've just got Hatate, Tierney, Yang, Maeda in these positions almost in a 4v3. And that's why they kept creating chances. Now, listen, they weren't as clinical and they weren't as potent as they have been over the years, but it was just something that we really struggled with. And I could see the idea behind it. And, if Boyle scores that early goal and you go 1-0 up, it would be easy to then maybe pull Nicky Cadden back in and say, right, drop back in. But I think with those two quick-fire goals, then I think Nicky Cadden overstretched in a tackle, which I think is how he maybe tweaked his calf and gone off. I think it just sort of I think, at that point, Salinger's made an error. You could maybe just feel there was a bit of tension amongst the team, and we kind of lost our way a little bit. But it certainly was an interesting setup. But it did make us quite lopsided, and it was one of those things. If the team get out the other side, then you're kind of isolated a little bit, and good teams are able to punish you in those areas.
Yeah, exactly. I think you kind of summed that up well there, the kind of issues that Hibs face. So obviously they do get back into the game via the Martin Boyle penalty. Liam Scales penalised for handball. So it gives Hibs something to cling to in terms of trying to get back into the game. I mean, after that though, as they tried to, salvage something, we did see a wee change of shape towards the end of the game. It's something, it's been debated. I think would Hibs be better off going to a back four? And I think it's one of those topics of discussion that always comes up sometimes if the results aren't quite going for you. So Hibs obviously now lost 2 games in a row. I mean, so how did that look to you? First question, and then do you think there's? I mean, we maybe have discussed this a few times on here, but it does keep coming up. Could it be something that is looked to in the future in terms of is there any mileage in playing that shape more regularly? But I mean, kind of first of all, how did it look on the day, and what was the thinking behind going to that? Do you think?
Well, I think a bit of it was maybe needs must, because at one point when Obita went off and Campbell came on, McGrath went to left wing back for a little bit. So, obviously at that point, that's not really ideal. But again, if you're still playing this kind of lopsided press that we were trying to do, then it doesn't make too much of a difference. It's probably fair to say that when Celtic had like extended periods of possession with the ball, Nicky Cadden dropped in, and we started to look like back to the usual kind of setup and shape, so it wasn't like we were totally going rogue out there. But yeah, obviously, like, Josh Campbell came on, then we had Newell obviously making his kind of long-awaited return, which was probably one of the high points in the game, I suppose, for us, seeing him back. And then obviously Ewan came on, so then it became a proper 4-2-3-1, and you seen that Barlaser and Newell sat as a 2. You then had McGrath, who pushed up to sort of left wing, Campbell in the sort of number 10 role, which then Bowie obviously still stays through the middle. And I think who that leaves, and Ewan, comes on to the right-hand side. And then obviously your Iredale has to go out to left back, which is not supernatural for him, but something we know he can manage. Then Rocky O'Hora, and then Chris Cadden. So it was, I think it was the right change to do, because we knew we were going to go long, and we knew that we were going to have runners off Bowie to try and to get loose balls and second balls, and a bit like playing the percentage game, I suppose, in Celtic's half. So I think it was tactically the right thing to do. And, we created a couple of, obviously we had Chris Cadden's chance. Bowie had a header that Schmeichel made a really good save from as well. And certainly it kept us kind of in the ascendancy and on the front foot towards the end of the game. Can I see it having any mileage going forward? I don't know is the answer. I think... as we've spoke about before, we've recruited to kind of play this shape. And I think at the moment, with no Hoylett and no Cleege on the game on Sunday, it made sense to do what we did there. And I suppose now if Nicky Cadden's out for a period of time, you could then say, well, we've now not got that wing back option. Maybe we need to change the shape. So I think it probably... in terms of the next home game against Falkirk, I think it would depend on if Nicky Cadden's fitness. I think if he's out and missing the game, and you're bringing Newell and Barlaser back in, I could maybe see it. But it's then what happens to Chaiwa, what happens to Mulligan. Do you put Mulligan at right back? Do you play him right wing, right in a forward? Do you give him that more attacking role in there? It's. The squad could probably adapt to it. Whether I think it suits every player on the pitch, I'm not 100% sure, but it would be a big decision to make in terms of changing it.
Is it one of those where it'd be difficult to do it without putting, at least one square peg in a round hole type thing?
Yeah, I think it would be. I mean, like off the top of my head, say. I mean, I suppose it just leaves you with more questions if you bring. Hanley will come back from his suspension. Then, who's your centre-half pairing? You probably can't play Rocky and Hanley as a 2. So, you've got to have O'Hora in there. So who misses out? You probably would rather have Obita at left back. So then you're pushing Nicky Cadden forward. But where does Clegy and Boyle fit into that? If Bowie's your 9 and you've got, I suppose McGrath could play the 10. If you put Barlasser in the middle, who plays next to him? Probably Mulligan, but it's not really, do you want him that deep? You probably prefer him to be able to get forward a little bit. Do you chuck him at right back and put Chris Cadden on the bench? Yeah, I think it'll be questions I'm sure Gray's mulling over, having had back-to-back defeats, but I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see a bit more of what we saw on Sunday, which is we set up in a shape and then it maybe drifts and tweaks throughout the game, and then we maybe change shape towards the end of the game if it's not working. I maybe think that's more likely than changing the whole shape.
Because I think I'd be inclined to agree with that, because I mean, even when you're just running through the potential decisions that would have to be made, it's almost as if like changing to that could create more questions than it does provide answers for David Gray. As we've said multiple times, it's a squad that's been built to play this this 3 at the back shape, if you like. But what I do find really interesting is what you've spoken about there, is it perhaps being a bit more adaptable in game, because I think if there is any sort of accusation that's been levelled at this team at times, it's that they're maybe lacking a sort of plan B at times in terms of mixing up that shape, in terms of the approach. I think you could see, particularly in the game at Motherwell last week, how easily it was nullified if you're coming up a team that's against a team that's really tactically switched on. So I think we maybe more likely to see, rather than a wholesale change, but just versions of the current system that are maybe a wee bit more adaptable. Because I think you see coaches talking about sometimes about how the actual on paper shape is a wee bit of a red herring at times, because it's not like it stays like that throughout the game. There are a lot of teams, it'll be an in possession shape, it'll be an out of possession shape. The shape will be different depending where purely depending where the ball is on the pitch. So I think is the question to maybe be asking, less of, is there going to be a wholesale change in the on paper system, and maybe whether we could see some sort of newfound tweaks within it. Would that be maybe a bit more relevant?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's been difficult because these last 2 games, like obviously Motherwell in particular, was really disappointing, and yeah, big criticism with that. Motherwell just we actually spoke about when Scott Pittman marked Barlasser in that first half against Livingston, and we couldn't get the ball out. So just did it brilliantly. Motherwell, really done well by leaving Hanley on the ball. But we've seen teams do that with Rocky before, like leaving Rocky on the ball and stuff like that. But it was more of them in possession. They put that little box midfield together and just pulled us from pillar to post, and we didn't really have any answers. But where it's been difficult to judge, I suppose, in both these games is Hanley got a red card, 30-odd minutes, which means it was hard to judge the rest of the game to see if we could have made changes and tweaks to adapt to that and to counter it. And then even against Celtic, 2 quick-fire goals, and then Nicky Cadden goes off, and he was the whole point in doing what we're doing in terms of pushing him high. So it's actually, I still agree that the jury's out on Gray and the coaching team about adapting in game. Like, I still think that's a question they've got to answer. But these last 2 games, they probably have a little bit of an out to go, well, actually, Hanley, red card, had to change everything. Nicky Cadden went off. That was the whole point of what we were trying to do. Had to move Obita and Iredale, and it's not ideal. So I still think there's those questions, but you're totally right. I mean, Gray said it right at the start, didn't he? That it was more about like principles of play and how they wanted to play, and it didn't really matter about the shape. However, since we changed to that back 3, that's what we went on that big run. So it makes sense that he would stick with that and we wouldn't tweak and adapt it, which I think is the right thing to do. But after a year of playing that way, then teams get wise to it. Teams come up with creative solutions to it. Maybe players get in rhythms and routines and maybe bad habits that they shouldn't do. And we've obviously had a change of personnel. still got players to come back, and players who, like, Cleege, who's not had a decent run in the last wee while. So when you're in that situation, I think as a manager, there probably is a time where you do start to look back at the shape and start having questions about it. But I think what we've seen with Gray is he's never somebody that changes things too quickly. I think he'll probably stick with that shape, but it would be good if we are chasing a game. Yeah, let's go to a back four and stick another couple of players up top and go for it. And I think that was probably more of a good thing to see at the end of the game. Like, I was like, oh, that's good. We're actually going for it. We're pushing for something here. He's changed the shape. He's not afraid to deviate from it. And that's a good thing that I think hopefully stands us in good stead going forward.
Yeah. Well, we'll end on that somewhat positive note that it could be something we see moving forward. But as for Sunday's game, I think we'll cover pretty much all the bases there. Again, obviously a disappointing result for Hibs, especially in the context of how the game panned out, but a chance to bounce back at home to Falkirk this weekend. Just before we go, folks, if you are watching us on YouTube and you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, can ask that you do consider hitting the subscribe button and liking the video as well. It helps us obviously to continue to grow the channel, and the more we grow the channel, the more of these videos we can bring you. So thank you to everybody who's subscribed so far, and as I said, if you want to join us, do hit that button. It's completely free to subscribe, and it'll get you match content as well, post-match press conferences, interviews, all of that stuff on our channel as well. You'll be able to see that if you go and have a wee look. But for now, folks, thanks to Craig for joining us, and as always for his insight into the game. We'll be back later in the week, as I said, to preview the game against Falkirk at Easter Road this weekend. But until then, folks, I hope you enjoyed the rest of your week, and we'll speak to you again soon. Cheers.